This is a special presentation for Night Ride FM.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome everyone here. My name is Dennis G, and we are right here talking with none other than David Schuler, also known as the Bad Dreamers. How are you doing tonight, David?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I am just great. It is a beautiful night. It was kind of a crazy week this week. I had some flooding in my basement, and it was pretty terrible.
Oh, that's not
But
fun.
all's well that ends well. We ended up saving all of our devices and, have a nice drink here. So, onwards and upwards. How's your day going so far?
It's good. Good. Just playing some catch up on a few things, but yeah, it's great.
It's good to catch up on the weekends. I definitely am right with you on that. All right, so I definitely want to dig in and talk about all the great music that you have. Your album is absolutely fantastic, and I'm just actually really excited to talk to you about it, about your writing style, and all the cool music that you make. How long have you been making music?
It's been a long time. I started playing guitar when I was 13, like going through 7th grade. And yeah, the truncated version would be I went through high school playing in bands and then tried to go to audio engineering school after I graduated. And then I dropped out and just kind of got my own Pro Tools rig and kept writing. I was in more bands through my 20s. And then, ultimately it led to me, writing and producing for a lot of other artists in the music business. And then I started this project a couple of years ago. But yeah, it's been a lifelong endeavor. We don't really have any other musicians in my family. But as soon as I sort of stumbled into playing guitar, that was kind of it.
Yeah. I definitely know exactly what you mean by that. I think it is like if you get started into music, you generally get started in music at an early age. I've been playing, in bands and stuff like that. I did like horn in band and everything like that. I played a little bit of guitar, and then I DJed and stuff like that. But once you get that bug, I think it just kind of digs into you, and you just kind of realize that that's what you're more or less going to be doing. As long as you can support yourself, if you find music early, I think that most people, they don't really let it go, and it kind of sticks with them. And yeah, you do some great work, great guitar work. I was actually going to ask about that. Now, you play guitar on your songs, obviously. You sing, obviously. I also hear some saxophones and stuff like that. Do you kind of farm that out to other musicians, or is that all done by you?
There was only one song that has a sax part in it, but I put a version of it out with only the saxophone, and then I pulled it off, and then I re-released it with the record, and I put guitars over it to kind of just blend it in. But yeah, I play everything, all the instruments, the drums, live drums, bass.
Oh, you do live drums?
Yeah. Some of it's live, not all of it. It's like it's a mixture. But yeah, it's pretty much just me on the album. I had somebody else master it, but
that's actually funny because I do find that the more artists that I talk to, it is kind of like its own art form. Mastering is just really one of them things where sometimes it's better just to kind of send that out to somebody who really knows how to take those little nuances of each individual sound and put out just a wonderfully mixed. And I was actually going to compliment you on that. The production value of what you do is just really top notch. The way that you have the sound separation and just the way that your vocals sit on the tracks. It's really, really well done.
No, I appreciate it. I mix everything, so I mix as I produce and write.
Right.
It's just kind of part of my process.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's probably maybe secondary or third to the song itself and the production. But yeah, the guy that mastered it did a great job.
Yeah, totally. But I keep thinking about the drums. Now, that is really interesting. How would you say, if you were to kind of pull a percentage out, would you say it would be maybe like 30% live drumming? Because when I listen to it, it sounds so clean when you hear the tracks, but it also has a very good organic sound too. So the way that you mixed even that was really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So let's see. On the album, yeah, there's 3 songs with live drums, and then New York Minute is live too. I play the drums on that, which isn't on the album. It came out afterwards. But yeah, so yeah, maybe like if there's 9 songs on the record, I don't know, 60-30, yeah, ish.
That's great. I mean, the good thing about that is it seems to give it that separation of musical elements where not every single song is going to sound the same. In fact, none of your songs really sound the same. They do have a common thread, but it seems like when you're listening, like when I first gave it a listen, like a lot of songs really sounded like inspired just through different other areas other than, just it sounds like you pull in inspirations from a lot of different places. Now, if you were to think about like maybe some of the inspirational people and artists that you have been most inspired by, what would you most likely lean towards as far as inspiration?
Man, I don't know, because I feel like it's changed and evolved so many times over the course of my musical life. When I was first starting out, it was only metal, so I was only listening to Metallica, and I was only listening to Pantera and Slayer, and I was certain that I was just gonna be a guitar player when I was a kid.
Okay.
That was sort of my mission, was to be like, just learn all of those sort of like influential albums at the time, and learn all those like, Master of Puppets and
Right.
Cowboys from Hell, and like learn all of those parts on guitar, and then sort of take that and sort of stick it into my own little thing. I quickly realized that just wasn't really what I wanted to do, because you grow up and you get introduced to different sounds and different music. And like my parents, more so my mom, I think she was listening to a lot of pop when I was like a baby.
Mhm.
And it didn't, like, those influences and like the memories of that music didn't really show up for me until much later, which is like what's sort of apparent in the Bad Dreamers stuff. But yeah, because she was listening to, Michael Jackson and Hall & Oates and
Right.
Tina Turner and stuff like that. So like I didn't really come back to those influences until maybe 2010 or 2009. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes across the spectrum. I have my favorite songwriters, I have my favorite producers, I have my favorite singers, I have my favorite guitar players, I have my favorite drummers. It's sort of a whole wheelhouse of different players and performers and stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting though. But it does seem to be a lot of these 80s inspirations and stuff like that. And I can kind of see how some of those things can kind of maybe lay dormant in the back of your mind. And maybe once you reached a specific point in your life, maybe it just kind of felt more natural to start to let that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pantera and Metallica and all that stuff. That is an element that I can definitely kind of hear a little bit in your music, though. But you also have that pop element too, which is just pure 80s gold. Even if you're not really like trying to zone in on that 80s vibe, you definitely hit the mark.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely intentional in certain songs for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of people compare your music to like more your Don Henley type of stuff, very Eagles kind of sounding. It's got a very organic 80s sound, but it's not like it's trying to be that traditional synthwave sound where, you just got a gated snare and bringing in some synths. And I mean, you're adding some really deep vocals and lyrics to your music too. It seems like you're more into writing genuine songs than just trying to fit some sort of mold, laid out to you by all the synthwave greats or whatever. It seems like your music is very genuine, deeply personal. And that's one of the things that really drew me in as far as my interest in your music, because I like artists that are basically putting their music out there as an extension of themselves, and not really trying to write something that they think people want to hear. But it sounds like you put a lot of your own, heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears into your music, which is fantastic. Now, with your lyrics and everything like that, when you're writing down your lyrics, do you write more from a first person, a third person? I know your album is called Songs About People, including myself. So I would have to say, like, a lot of these would be more geared towards a first person. Am I right in that?
Actually, I think again, it's probably like maybe a third of the album is coming from like deliberate personal experiences. I think that my opinion is very apparent across the board in terms of like things that I like and things that I don't like, and whether that's lyrically or musically or melodically speaking. But yeah, I mean, to me, it all starts with the song. I've just I had a great mentor as a songwriter, which led to like my career as a songwriter and a producer, like that pre-existed that, and also I've just found that the concept for the song itself comes to me first before anything else does. I don't really meddle with like music riffs or, parts or ideas. I used to try and write that way, but it would just take me forever to find what I was looking for when, I think it's so much more interesting to zero in on what it is that you're trying to say first. Because if I can establish a narrative and land on a concept that is interesting enough to me, and I have I don't know. I suppose I have a high bar for songwriting because of the writers that I sort of aspire to and that I listen to, and it's people like Diane Warren or like John Lennon, and it's like it's that caliber of storyteller that, because it's a craft, like and kind of like woodworking is a craft. Like I'm sure that anyone, if they set out and bought some wood and took a day, they could build a picnic table, but to what degree of picnic table, or what kind of woodworking can you do? And I've been sort of chiseling away at that craft for a really long time, and it's not to say that I would even place myself in the league of a writer such as like a John Lennon or a Diane Warren, but I have a high bar for storytelling.
Right.
And I try to find the ideas in interesting places. Like, so there's songs that are on the album that are being told through the perspective of characters in movies that I love. There's songs that are about my own personal experiences. It just kind of all comes from sort of different places, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, though. So it seems like you are more or less focused on really trying to get the narrative correct, and then the song, the lyrics and the riffs and everything like that follow once you find that structure, that one story that you want to have told, which is really interesting because a lot of artists will kind of do the opposite. They'll pull out this riff and then they'll write, okay, let me write some lyrics about that. But I really like that. And in fact, it's one of the things that gravitated me to your music was the fact that you did that thing where you were trying to pull that narrative and that concept and to really have that really sound and concrete before you even started to write riffs and stuff like that. And I'm sure it's a mix too. I'm sure you're going to have a day too where you're going to be like, oh, that's a really cool thing I did on the guitar, and let me record that or something like that. But it does seem to come off the way that you really have a lot of stories to be told. And that's what I really find fascinating about your music. One of the other things that I wanted to discuss too is a couple of really interesting things that I noticed throughout some of your songs, especially How to Disappear,
Hmm.
and also Hit Me Harder. You use sound in a very unique way too. And I don't really know of any other artist that uses sound the way that you do. It's almost like you're using specific sounds as a punctuation to the music and to the phrasing and the story that you're trying to tell. Where did those ideas come from? For example, with How to Disappear, you have the finger snap. Like, did you just kind of wake up in the middle of the night and be like, yeah, that's what I want to do? Like, how did that little piece come into play?
I couldn't even tell you because I feel like that's definitely sort of in line with the production process for me, and that just kind of unfolds as it unfolds. I'm not really like thinking too much about what needs to happen at any given moment. I mean, I think ultimately the production on the record should support the story that the song is telling. But there's so many ways that you can go about doing that, and there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do it. But yeah, I also have like a few like sort of set of rules as a producer that while I'm making a record that I know that I try to play by, because it's stuff that's worked for me for other artists and previous bands and stuff like that. So, like I try to sort of implement those things across the board while I'm producing, just to keep it interesting and to make sure that things are happening every however many measures, to keep the listener on their toes, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I can't say that like I had like any kind of epiphany about like that particular moment or any moment really. They just kind of, happen as you build things, like, because again, like I start with a lyric and a melody, and it's either like chords on a piano or chords on a guitar. And then from there, a groove, and, all the rest of the things kind of fall into place once the structure is there. And yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's a constant experiment. Like, honestly, if it were up to me, I'd still be working on those tracks. I can't even listen to them because it's one of those things, it's like you just have to get to a point where you have to put it out. And I think that that's the most important. It's the hardest part, but it's also the most important part is like finishing whatever you start and then sending it off into the world. Because, it's like execution is almost just as important as the sort of like ideology behind whatever it is that you're doing. And you have to finish it, and it's hard when there's no one really breathing down your neck and you're alone working on this thing. Like, when is it done? When is it like finished? How many more things do you need to tweak? How many times are you going to go back through and re-sing that line? It's an endless cycle. You just have to get to a place where you're like, okay, I need to put this out.
Right. It definitely sounds like you put a lot of time and effort into it. And it does sound like you really kind of honed a lot of the melodies, the vocals, and the production is just, like I said, top notch. How long, let's say from like start to finish, was this an album that you wrote over a course of a year, a few years? Were these songs that were maybe germinating for many, many years? Like maybe this particular album, how long would you say this album took for you to write?
I think like the idea for the project wasn't even, the album. I mean, the album itself, I suppose, once I decided to make an album, that was around September 2017, and then it came out in October 2018. So that was about a year, but I had initially released Who You Run To in May of 17.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've told this story before. I could just sort of like brush through it again. But so part of the reason that I moved to Los Angeles, not only I was in a publishing deal and I was like, songwriting on a regular basis and co-writing on a regular basis. And I had made a handful of records for artists like Pink and John Legend and Backstreet Boys and New Politics and all these other artists. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 2013 to sort of expand upon that because I came from New York. And so when I got out here, quietly, I had sort of like an ulterior motive to pursue my passion for filmmaking because it's just as important to me as music and songwriting and so on and so forth. So I had made a number of just silly films over the years with friends and music videos. And so, coming to Los Angeles for me was like, it was sort of loaded with like that in the barrel, I guess, at the time. So anyways, in 2017, I got into a place where I was ready to make my first short film, and my girlfriend and I were in the process of writing. She's an actress and she's also a producer. And we were in the process of writing and just sort of spitballing ideas for what we wanted to do. And I knew that I needed music in the short, but I didn't want to just, because I was going to direct it and edit it and, score it and everything. So I wanted to try to cap how much of the creative process I was going to oversee, because it's just a lot. Like, that whole process is like, filmmaking can be a much more collaborative effort than music, unless you're, just in a band and you get together and jam and then you go tour and so on and so forth. But so I knew that I needed music in this short film, and I had gone around to friends of mine to say, hey, I'm going to make a short film. It would be great if I could use like one of your songs. And everyone just kind of looked at me like, you're making a short film? Like, why the fuck would you do that? Because no one really, it's like, I'm not billboarding the fact that I'm also a filmmaker, because it's very easy for people to just assume like, oh, you're a musician, so like that's what you do. That's where the finish line is. You make music. But so I look at guys like a huge inspiration for me is John Carpenter, because not only is he writes and directs his films, he scores them. He's a musician. He's a touring musician. He's kind of like an auteur in those ways. But anyway, so when I couldn't get any music for this short, which was a horror, I decided to come up with like an alias, like a fake artist to create and just put on the internet so that I could give it a name. And so that, if anyone were to ever see this short film, they could be, they could hear that song and be like, oh, who is that? And then look it up and there's a band. So that's how the Bad Dreamers started. I actually wrote Who You Run To for a scene in the short.
Oh, wow.
And then I put it on the internet, and then it made its way around. And eventually I was like, you know what? I actually really liked writing that music. It was really cool. And I had a sort of like I suppose an even more proper synthwave endeavor in 2011 called Pretty in Pink. And that's out there too. Like it's not on like the main platforms, but like you can find it. It's not hard to find. And it was sort of like at the time when I started that project, I just didn't really know what to do with it, because I also I was just not at all focused on making music for me. I had just signed a publishing deal at BMG, and it was like purely a hobby. But that stuff was even more synthwave than the Bad Dreamer stuff would be.
Oh, wow.
But so when I started this stuff with the Bad Dreamers, it felt like I sort of picked that up and dusted it off and further refined what that was. And yeah, so I suppose, May 2017 through when the album came out in October 2018. So I suppose you could say it was a year and a half, but really only intensively was I working on the record from January 18 to October, I guess. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response.
No,
to your
that was a
question.
great response. No, it's really good information. And in fact, Pretty in Pink, I'm going to go and Google that because
Yeah, I think it might only be on like Reverb Nation, and it sucks too because there was a hard drive with those masters that I would love to break out and clean up.
Right.
But I don't know where that hard drive is. That it got lost in a move, I think, or
Oh, no.
something. But yeah.
That's always the dreaded producer woe is I got all that great music on a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
No, that is really cool. And yeah, like I was saying, it's really interesting that the music that you put out, it's of a pop nature, but it's got so many different elements to it, which I find fascinating. And I really, really get into a lot of groups that just don't try to be one specific type of cookie cutter type of operation. You put a lot of different sounds into it, which is really cool. In fact, I know I heard it. And in fact, I wasn't really crazy when I read Iron Skull. It actually had mentioned it too. Your song Reach You.
Yeah, yep.
He had basically kind of laid out that you have a little bit of like Drake elements. I hear some more Prince inspiration myself, like more like a Purple Rain type of vibe. But I find it
Yeah,
fascinating.
I think both of those are fair game for sure.
So yeah, it's really, really good the way that you change it up every couple tracks where it just seems to kind of hit you at all different angles. So obviously you have some inspirations there as well with Prince, and who doesn't have inspirations from Prince?
Yeah, for me, like Prince is, he's like a top 3 guitar player for me.
He was, really was.
Just his sound and some of the choices that he made on the records. I don't know. He's just sort of like, yeah, he was kind of an anomaly of a musician.
That song has to me, like a very Purple Rainy kind of sound, and it does have some of that Drake to it too. Just really good songs lyrically, and that's one of the songs. If I was to pick like maybe a top 3, that would definitely be on that particular top 3 list. One of the other ones, which as I briefly mentioned it a little earlier with the punctuation. Now, I'm going to have to dig into this a little bit more because this is my favorite song on the album. It's Hit Me Harder.
Yeah.
And man, there's just so much to unpack with that song. Just the way, again, that you provide the punctuation. I almost feel like I'm giving a spoiler alert, but there's a gunshot that goes off, you know, right in the middle of the song. After that, there's no more lyrics. You just play out the rest of the song. And just the subject matter is it's very dark and it really, really hits the senses like to the point of perfection where when you listen to that song, you listen to the lyrics. I mean, it just sucks you in. You are almost like hanging on every lyric that comes out of your mouth. And I find music like that, I find fascinating, the inspiration and the way that it's delivered. And that's the stuff that I really love as a music fan is just songs like that that really kind of dig into, like you said, to that narrative. Now, here's my question. I need to know, is
Yeah.
this personally inspired? Is this a movie? Is this somebody you knew? Because this is some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. It's based very loosely on a true story. That has nothing to do with me. It was something that I'd read about a while back.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it is based on a true story about, there was a woman, her name was Diana. Forgive me if I pronounce the last name wrong. Diana Lalkin or Lalchin. I don't. But yeah, I mean, I want to say that I read about it on either CNN or something. But I read about this woman that shot and killed her husband, and it wasn't over money. It wasn't over an affair or like alimony or anything like that. It was the fact that he was abusing her, not just. I don't know why it stuck with me because it didn't at first. It was just one of those things that I'd heard and read about, and then the idea of like placing myself in that position where it's like, this is sort of my own lens on that, but being in a relationship with someone and, being infatuated with that person. And then also at the same time, it's like, it's kind of like a Stockholm syndrome thing where, it's an abusive relationship. You don't know how to get out of it and everything. And that's not at all like the lyric that I wrote has absolutely nothing to do with that woman's story.
Uh-huh.
It was something that I wanted to fictionalize it because I just felt like it's not like, who am I to write a song about this woman's like suffering? I mean, it's a very real thing, and it's nothing to do with me. But the takeaway for me, like the way that it made me feel, I was like, oh, well, like it just seemed like such an anti-hero sort of story. And those are my favorites. Those are my favorite stories. My favorite movies, my favorite series, their favorite, just in general, like having like a complex sort of anti-hero / protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but it was very loosely based on a true story.
That's really interesting because I love when artists do that. They take an inspiration and they might take like a little element of a particular event or something that happened. Then they put their own artistic spin on it, provide a little bit more narrative, and it just kind of builds this whole story in itself. And I do think that's really interesting. So I hope she didn't really shoot this dude in a bar because, man, that would suck. Like, really bad, but
That's interesting because I never placed it in a bar, but I mean, it's always interesting to hear. Like, I'm trying to think of what the lyric says. There's definitely like it implies that they're in a public place at first, but
yeah,
yeah,
because it's almost like I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to listen to it like 20 more times now. And more
yeah,
excuses
totally,
to listen to the Bad Dreamers. But yeah, it is funny too, like the images that get colored in your mind as a listener. Like you get
yeah,
inspired, you write a song to the narrative, and then as the listeners, they fill in all the things that
yeah. It takes on a different meaning.
yeah, and that's what I think is really the most magical thing about music is
Yep.
how people can kind of get hit and have their own inspiration and build their own narrative inside of their own head. And a lot of times will relate it to stuff that's going on in their lives. So good job. I love that song, I tell you. And you got a lot of really good artists that I was just looking at your playlist, your Night Ride playlist, and just a lot of really, really great artists that you have on there. Some surprised me a little bit. If you were to pick one of the most underrated artists on that list, just out of curiosity, who do you think you would pick if you had to pick one?
If I had to pick one, that's a tricky one. I'm torn between two because one of them is an older artist and one of them is a newer one. Well, I feel like John Waite is probably one of the most overlooked.
I think you're probably right.
I mean, granted, I'm not that familiar with his catalog of music, but anyone that knows that name knows like the one song, that song "Missing You."
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
it had such a specific quality to it. I think a lot of people gave him some shit for sort of ripping off the Police, or I don't know, but it just never really sort of like called upon that sound for me when I heard it. So yeah, I mean, I probably have to say John Waite. Like,
Okay.
it would have been cool to hear like a couple more of those mid-tempo sort of moodier songs that like really gave like a good look into like who he was as a guy, because I didn't really connect with the rest of the music that he put out.
Hmm.
But it's not to say that it's not great. I just it just didn't really speak to me the way that song does,
Right.
per se. But
And the other one, what would that happen to be?
um I'm actually, I'm gonna plead the fifth, because I don't like it's an artist that I do listen to quite a bit.
Right.
It's a band, and they're the current band working on new music right now. But it's just hard to say in the world that we live in now it's hard to measure if you're underrated or not, because
Right.
there's so many different ways that people can find the music. So through my lens on that artist, I'm unfortunately just conditioned to look at them as an artist, and also to factor in like, oh, well, they have this many listeners on Spotify and this many Instagram followers and this
Right.
many Twitter followers. And to someone who's just sort of setting out on a journey to be an artist and everything, who you're knocking on doors to try to get anyone to listen to your music, the artist that I'm thinking of is enormous. They can tour the world and fill clubs, and like that's like a seemingly almost unattainable goal for a brand new musician just starting out. But then they're not a platinum selling artist, they're not all over the radio,
Right.
and I would hate to label anyone in this day and age. Like, that's the beauty of the internet. You can like truly just sort of carve out your own little corner of the world,
Hmm.
and if you make good music, it'll make its way to the right listeners,
Right.
So I would hate to say that they're underrated. So I'm gonna plead the fifth.
That's a fair statement. In fact, you brought up a very good point. How do you really define what is well received or not well received? And when you really try to distill it down to Spotify numbers or Twitter followers or anything like that, it really does them a little bit of a disservice, because
Yeah, of course. I'm not drawing conclusions based on like statistics or song play counts or anything like that, like maybe like a record company would if they were seeking to sign an artist or something like that. But, it's just unfortunately part of the world that we now live in as current artists. We always have to be looking at a set of numbers.
Right.
It sucks. It's not like you make a record and then you just go out and tour it and the label does their thing. The marketing happens between radio stations and magazines and TV shows and all these different things. Like, everything's happening right in front of you. It's in your hand, and you can see it. When people are writing about your music, what people are saying about your music, when they're saying it. So it's an unfortunate thing, and I think that it's one of those ingredients in the recipe that you just sort of have to balance out, because I think it's important to be aware of like how your music connects with people, but only to a certain degree, because at least for me, I have to make music that I like and that I would listen to, and then I have to draw the line there, because I'm not necessarily doing it for any other purpose.
Right.
So if someone doesn't necessarily listen to it or doesn't connect with it, that's fine. But there's also like, there's going to be haters. There's going to be people that compare you to, whether it's an artist that you like or an artist that you don't like, or, like when you're creating something, the last thing you want to do is immediately be compared, but it's just the nature of the beast, So when you're creating things in this age of the internet and sharing information and so on and so forth, you have to sort of emotionally prepare yourself to let go of that thing and just let it find its way. Because, yeah, I mean, I'd be a liar if I said I didn't look at my Spotify monthly listeners number every day.
Right.
I look every day. And I don't know why it matters to me, but it does.
Yeah.
Like I give a shit. I'm still trying to figure out why, because this whole sort of pursuit of this project has been nothing more than pure, I suppose, like fulfillment for my own like musical itch.
Right.
Yeah, I just can't help it but look at those numbers, you know.
Well, they sit there and stare at you, and they stare in your face, and it's the same way with anything, I guess. You're like, I'm not gonna look. I don't care. I don't care how many Twitter
Yeah.
followers I have. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like looking at my Twitter followers. I'm like, it
Well,
really at
yeah,
the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But it's still
it
nice to
doesn't.
have that little bit of validation that you
Yeah,
have people that really are engaged with your music. And sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of times that's really the quickest way to kind of put a barometer on things as to see,
sure.
it looks great. You have X amount of followers, you have X amount of listeners. You can't really engage with every single person, but it's nice to know that, people are listening to your stuff. That's a personal satisfaction and it's important. But yeah, I can totally see what you're saying. You definitely have to scratch that itch and put the music that you want to put out to satisfy that thing that you have as an artist to really just put that out and express
Yeah,
yourself in that way.
yeah, for sure.
So tell me a little bit about the sneak preview that we have of Georgetown. Where is the concept coming from? Is that kind of leading into the direction of your new sound?
Yeah, for sure. So the song is called Georgetown. It comes out on September 6th. And yeah, I mean, it took me a while because I was experimenting with just a lot of different ideas and different ways to take the sound because I don't know, I don't really want to keep doing the same thing. And I want to find new ways to, stay inspired and keep telling stories and whatnot. But yeah, so Georgetown, it's very much representative of the music to come. It's largely inspired by the horror films that I grew up loving and that I was introduced to as a kid, and the ways that those films sort of made me feel, and the sounds that stuck with me through the years, and just the different elements. I mean, like when you watch a scary movie as a child, it affects you in a different way
Sure.
than it does in an adult as an adult. And I've found that as I've grown up and I've gone deeper into the genre and have like a deeper love for it, that I'm constantly sort of seeking that experience that I had as a kid, that like sort of, I suppose it could be compared to like, people that do drugs or, like you get that first high and then you're always sort of pursuing that, for forever, and it forms an addiction. I mean, I suppose that this is a form of addiction because I'm obsessed with genre film, and
Oh, nice.
it's no secret. Like I've talked at length about it in other interviews and so on and so forth. But yeah, so Georgetown is, without revealing too much about exactly what it's saying or how it's saying it, it's called Georgetown because that's where The Exorcist took place, and
Okay.
it's where the novel also took place, I believe, and also the story that the novel was written about. But yeah, the idea is that I'm sort of really fascinated by revisiting those films and sort of telling different stories through the characters' eyes in the films. So the song, it's about a hypothetical conversation that two of the characters have that doesn't necessarily take place in the movie, but like could very well have taken place in, an alternate cut, so to speak. So yeah, the new stuff it's a lot darker than the last record. There were a few songs on the record that might have sort of aimed in that direction, but I'm definitely taking things into like the horror genre, cinemascope kind of vibe for the music down the line, for sure.
Nice. So you're going all in.
Yeah, I guess so. I
That's
guess
great
so, and
though.
it's so weird because like it's just I don't get a dark I just don't get a dark feeling from genre films. Like it's as ironic as it sounds, I feel like that there's more heart in some of my favorite horror films than there are even in some of the most celebrated dramas and, independent films of other cloth. But yeah, it's definitely inspired a new thing for this project, which is really cool.
Oh, that's very exciting. And we can't wait to hear the song. And that is coming out on what date?
September 6th.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Very
Yeah.
good.
So we're going to go ahead and get ready to wrap this up. I know we've been talking, almost an hour now, so that is great. A lot of good information. Really, I just wanted to kind of lean into the future to maybe take a look at what's
Yeah.
coming up for you. I know you just put out the new single, New York Minute, which is fantastic, by the way. We love it. We play it at the
Great.
station all the time. Uh,
Awesome.
Now, is that going to be like worked into a new album?
Um, you know, Yeah, no, I mean, like, I can confidently say that the next record will be a synthwave record. I've sort of gone back and forth on like finding my way into that space.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think it's quite apparent that the synthwave elements are really like that's sort of the main. I'll use this adjective again. Sort of the main ingredient that really like sort of resonated post album release. I've found that like the synthwave community has really taken to the music. So yeah, I've been trying to find because it's like you said, it's like synthwave up to this point. I mean, there's a lot of unfortunate cliches about the genre.
There is, yeah.
It's the palm trees and the
Laser grids.
laser grids and yeah, the whole thing. And it's like that's cool. Like to me, like, execution is kind of the whole thing. So it's like, how do you tie it up and make it your own? So I wouldn't necessarily know how to describe what to expect. I would say that like, and I also don't know if it's going to be a full length or an EP. I'm sort of mulling over that still. But yeah, it's going to be synthwave and it's going to be dark and it's going to be very inspired by 80s horror cinema. And,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, so I mean, I feel like if Hit Me Harder was like a standout track, then I think that like it's probably safe to say that things are probably going to head a little bit more in that direction.
Well, I'm excited.
I am too, man. I don't really know how it's going to pan out yet, but I've already started a few songs and I'm pretty stoked. I'm taking my time.
That's awesome. Any touring plans?
Yeah, there's a couple things that are on deck. I'm not really sure. I think we might, because I have a live band, and that was also a big thing for me was, if I'm going to start a music project, I want to go and I want to play with other people.
Awesome.
And I don't want to get up there and just hit a keyboard because it's also like, I feel like I go see so many acts live and there's really no live instrumentation. And I'm like, what did I pay to see? Like,
It's tough. Stems are
yeah,
fact of life,
it's tough.
unfortunately.
And, it's kind of a dealer's choice thing because some people want to hear the music that they listen to at home or in their car. They want to hear that version of it live.
Right.
With
The studio
a live
version.
vocal or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and that's cool. But for me, like I have a great drummer, a great guitar player, a great bass player, a great keyboard player. And I pride myself in having like a really dope live band. These guys are all good friends of mine and they're amazing musicians. So we might do another headlining date in LA. It's tough. Like touring for me is tough because again, this is kind of happening. Like I'm composing for a few different things. I'm working on a new series for Amazon Prime right now. And there's also like an indie feature that I'm sort of in pre-production for with, hopefully they're going to shoot in the fall. So I have to carve time out for the Bad Dreamers between all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then touring is increasingly complicated because, it's like, it's expensive to tour and
Right.
it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. And yeah, so it's tough. So I think in terms of live shows, definitely more in LA this year, maybe one or two more. But the goal ultimately is to tour properly. I think things would have to sort of inflate into a next level to justify taking the time away.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see. I mean, lead with the music and just kind of see where it lands.
Yeah, I mean, you always have those big festivals too, which
Yeah.
I would love to get you out at a Neon Retro Fest or an Outland. That would be absolutely fantastic. Even if you did like one show, try to do it on the East Coast. But
Yeah,
I
no,
totally get
totally.
what you're saying. You have to stay grounded with where you are and what you got going on because it sounds like you have a lot going on with a lot of different projects. And I am just really, really glad that you do spend the time to really put this stuff out to the synthwave fans, to the music fans in general. The Bad Dreamers is just top notch quality, good stuff that I love because it's not sounding like that cookie cutter synthwave type of stuff. This is
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
organic, it's rich, it's full of a narrative that I just love. I'd love to just be pulled in by a good story. To me, that's what music is. Music is writing a story for your mind. I mean, you're just hitting the mark time and time again. So can't wait to have more stuff coming out from you. We're definitely going to keep a lookout. And I thank you for the time that you spent to talk with me. And
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm really excited to hear some new stuff with you. And again, thank you. And we will be listening.